World Eaters, the Emperor's wild warhounds, unleashed on foes that needed a little bit of extra savagery and when you don't need prisoners. Many believe the World Eaters were mistreated by the Emperor, seen as cannon fodder despite their success rate, which eventually led to their betrayal, which in their view was an eye for an eye. Their Gene Father and Primarch Angron had a tragic upbringing, forced to fight as a slave for the amusement of his masters, and was eventually implanted with the cybernetic augment known as the Butcher's Nails, which enhances our lust for violence. I'm going to show you how to paint the white colour scheme for the pre-Heresy World Eaters. These days they're generally seen in red armour, an homage to the blood god Khorne. This is a relatively simple paint scheme, and I'm going to show you how to do this using inks and contrast paints mainly. And I'll show you how to do a really cool blood splatter effect. Let's get started. After we prime this model in black, I'm going to give it our first coat of Vallejo London Grey. And this isn't an airbrush paint, so we're going to have to thin it about 50-50 with some airbrush thinners. And I'm going to try and retain some of the black by spraying mainly the top of this model, but I'm also going to catch the legs as well. That way by the time we do our whites, we should get a little bit of the shadow coming through. Once our grey coat is dry, I'm going to go over with some Liquitex white ink. And to make this a little more transparent, I'm going to thin it down about 30%. This is just to make sure it's not too bright, so we've still got a little bit of wiggle room for highlights. And when that's completely dry, I'm going to come in with pure ink, concentrating mainly on the top of the head and the feet, just to get that definition. For the gold accents on this model, I'm going to be using Scale 75 Viking Gold. Some of the artwork for these models have all of the trim painted in gold and some of them just the top half. On this particular model, I'm just going to do the shoulders, the banding on the helmet and the gorget that goes around the throat. And this is partly because I want these models to be nice and quick to pump out, because these Horus Heresy armies include a lot of marines, and you can save the gold trim for your sergeants if you like, which is what I tend to do. For the blue details in this model, I'm going to be using Citadel Contrast Ultramarines Blue. Now these contrast paints generally work pretty well with white, but for this one I had to do a couple of coats because it started to look a little bit streaky. But once you get a nice smooth coat and it's dried, these colours will save you a lot of time in highlighting and shading, as it's pretty much done the work itself. And I'm also going to paint the top middle part of the power pack and the knee pad. And for my plain metallic colours, I'm going to be using Vallejo Gunmetal Grey. And this colour is going to be used for the exhaust on the power pack, the barrel and the magazine on the bolt rifle, and the teeth on the chainsword, along with any other cabling or mechanical pieces on this model. And before I actually paint the barrel and the magazine on this bolt gun, I'm just going to paint the casing black, and I'm just using Abaddon black here, just nice and thin. Now that all the base colours are blocked out, we're going to start weathering this model. And to start with, we're going to be using Agrax Earthshade. And because this white ink has a slightly glossy finish, it's going to make this a lot easier. The gloss helps the wash find the more narrow recesses more easily, which is going to result in less cleanup afterwards. So you can afford to be a little bit messier with your washes if you're painting it onto a gloss surface. And I'm going to be painting this wash directly into all the deep recesses. And while I'm here, I'm also going to give the gold details a nice wash with this Agrax Earthshade. And the second step in our weathering process is a little bit different. We're going to be using a bit of sponge and some Rhinox hide, or any dark brown paint really. And similar to dry brushing, we put a little bit of paint on the sponge and then dab the excess off. And very gently dab this all over the model, concentrating mainly on the lower parts, which is where I imagine most of the damage would come from. And sorry the footage here isn't very good, but just when you're doing this, make sure you don't overdo it. Remember, less is more when doing these sorts of effects. And to finish off this effect, I'm going to use a little bit of white. And this is just going to highlight the deeper craters and make them look a little bit more 3D. And also, while I have this white paint out, I'm going to paint the number 12 in Roman numerals on the knee pad. Which in hindsight I probably should have done before I weathered it. And then we just want a small dab of white in the center of each eye, which we're then going to fill in with Blood Angel's red contrast paint. Now if you're looking for a World Eater's homeworld,
it no longer exists.
Angron grew up on New Syria, but he had a pretty terrible time there. and later the planet was purged by the World Eaters. They had a de facto home known as Bod, but that was also destroyed by the Iron Hands. So I decided just to do a temperate climate base on this model, starting with Sterling Mud. And once that's dry, I was going to hit it with a wash of Agrax Earthshade. And finally a dry brush of Gorthor Brown. Now there can't be a blood crazed maniac without a little bit of blood, so I'm going to show you how to do this really cool splatter effect. Using Blood for the Blood God effect paint from Citadel, I'm going to use an old flat brush and just a little piece of wood. You can even use a toothpick for this. And with a little bit of the paint on the brush, just flick it against the piece of wood. And this is going to give you some realistic splatter effects, and try and move this around the model, experimenting with different angles. And I'm going to use the excess on my brush just to clog up the teeth on the chainsword, because we know the World Eaters love a good melee weapon. And there we have it, our first World Eaters Legionary. Now this scheme was a lot of fun to paint. It's really fun roughing up that real nice white armour, and that red blood on the white armour gives it some real impact. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe, and keep an eye out for some more content coming soon. I have ran out of these Mark III Marines, but I'm just waiting for them to come back into stock so I can buy some more. So there may be a little bit of delay on the next Horus Heresy models, but I have some more content to fill in the time.